Hello again, XJW Bible Bites. Now, as I mentioned before, I planned on doing a review of the Book of Yashar, or at least one of the books, called the Book of Yashar. Here it is. So, I first became interested in the Apocrypha at a very young age. That was when I learned that there were biblical books, or scrolls that were not in the Bible. Me being me, I wanted to see what they said. But at that point, I was a little too young to effectively search out such things myself, and I trusted what was told to me by my parents, who trusted what they were told from the Watchtower Society. That being that the books outside of the 66 books of the Protestant canon were fake and silly, the works of men only. But now, I believe the question of, is the Apocrypha worth studying, is a little bit more nuanced than 0 or 1. Though just as passages have been altered in the Bible, I think that certain manuscripts were taken out of canon or general circulation in the centuries CE because they contained either ideas that either Jewish religious leaders or members of the Christian Church did not like. I believe that many were lost for long periods of time, or that only pieces and fragments have survived. And I don't think all of the Apocrypha, or even sections of modernized versions of the Apocrypha, should be considered inspired scripture. But coming out of religions, having religious doctrine implanted into one's head, can cause an immediate raising of the hackles and a desire to dismiss something that might seem to contradict the Bible at first, at face value, or what we think we know about the Bible, or might touch on a subject that is actually found in the Bible. We just don't either recall it or have never been taught it before, even if it's just one passage. So my suggestion is that when considering either new views from the Bible or these manuscripts that are outside of the Protestant canon, maintain a compartmentalized mind. Don't immediately dismiss new thoughts as hooey, but do not rush to take such findings as God-inspired, solidified facts, even if they appeal to us. I'll read 1 Corinthians 3:2. There it says, "I gave you milk, not solid food, for you are not ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready." It's an admonition not to be like the people of that congregation. Now, coming out of the Watchtower Society, I never realized how biblically ignorant witnesses in general are. And I'm not trying to be insulting, because I include myself in that number. The issue with the witness organization's teaching is that you hear the same points, passages, and accounts over and over, because it's about indoctrination, not learning. So many parts and pieces of the Bible are pretty much ignored that aren't considered important by the society in their indoctrination, or that might contradict established teachings. Truly deeper things that can be found in the Bible, or little-known things, are pushed aside to fit in more Watchtower doctrine. Watchtower doctrine that will probably change at some point. Meanwhile, the Bible, in generalization, has been consistent for thousands of years with its core and theme. The society makes it so easy to be biblically lazy because they want you asleep and programmed. So when we encounter something new, a new view, a new verse, or a different theological view, sometimes our instinct might be to reactionarily reject it. But something I want to iterate very clearly, many things found in the Apocrypha, while they might be interesting or help us understand other canonical passages, are not salvation issues. What is a salvation issue? Any issue that revolves around Christ. Anything that goes contrary to the core doctrine of Christ being the only begotten Son of God, sent in the flesh as a second Adam, a ransom, dying and shedding his blood, and being resurrected on the third day to be exalted by the Father in heaven, is to be immediately disregarded. Galatians 1:8. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. Now, secondly, I have only read the entire Book of Yashar through once. And my retention is not what it was in my younger days, due to issues, but even so, I'm sure there are many things that I missed, didn't catch, or didn't pay enough attention to as I read it through. It's not a short book. It's much longer than Enoch. So this is not some kind of deep scholarly breakdown of the book. I do hope to do a more in-depth study of the book in the background in the far future. But there are many other works that I'm keen on delving into, and I only have so much time. So this is hitting some of the basics. With those important points in mind, do I think that the 1840 edition of the Book of Yashar is the real Book of Yashar referenced in Joshua 10:13 and 2 Samuel 1:18? Honestly, no, I do not. As much as one might want it to be. But do I think this book called Yashar is worth reading? I do, and I'll break down why. Do I think it's a load of bunk, like some of the rabbis I saw on the internet? Not at all, and I'll explain more. I'll state up front, there are no ancient manuscripts of Yashar available. Not to the public, anyway, if they do exist, to the best of my knowledge. None have been found, which is not unusual for ancient manuscripts. It's really not. Maybe someday there will be a dig where they do find some, in jars somewhere, or maybe the Vatican has them locked away in a vault. I don't know. But the 1840 Nash and Gould edition appears to be a well-certified translation of a medieval Hebrew document originating from around the 13th century. Mr. Moses Samuel of Liverpool rendered this text originally. Samuel himself was a 19th century Jewish Hebraist who was well respected, according to Bernard Wasserstein of the Jewish Historical Society of England. Reference, volume 35. This 1840 edition of Yashar is still debated, and not thought to be a legitimate Book of Yashar by most Jewish or Christian academics. But it is not regarded as an outright forgery or fraud, as with the other so-called books of Yashar, like the 1751 Jacob Llive version printed in London. Edgar J. Goodspeed, a biblical scholar and professor emeritus of the University of Chicago, cites the 1751 and 1829 works as shameless literary forgeries. However, Goodspeed said that the 1840 version appears to be a translation of a 13th century Hebrew document. I will note that in 1986, Jacob Llive began to argue that because of a lack of evidence of 1840 Yashar manuscripts predating 1625 AD, that it should be regarded as a work of fiction. However, a lack of evidence of is not exactly a rock-like foundation to build your argument on, in my view. Now I will read the certifications of translation from the preface of the book itself. Certificates. University of New York, April 10th, 1840. I have compared a large portion of the translation of the Book of Yashar with the original Hebrew, and I find it faithfully and eloquently rendered into English. The Hebrew itself is very pure character. Isaac Nordheimer, Professor of Oriental Literature. To Nash and Gould. Gentlemen, I am acquainted with the Book of Yashar, having read a considerable part of it while in the hands of the translator in England. The Hebrew is purely written, and the translator is an eminent scholar and has done it ample justice. It is full of interest throughout, and breathes a pure spirit of piety and religion, and I am satisfied that this is the first English translation ever made of that work. The Royal Asiatic Society at Calcutta, never having completed the translation of their copy, as anticipated. April 14, 1840. H.V. Nathan, Minister of the English and German Synagogue, Kingston, Jamaica. The following letter is from Professor Turner, an able Hebrew scholar. Theological Seminary, Chelsea Square, New York, April 28, 1840. Gentlemen, Agreeably to a request made to me yesterday by Mr. Noah, I have sufficiently examined the English version of the rabbinical work which heads the title, the Book of Yashar, to satisfy myself to its general correctness. I have carefully compared 3 chapters of the translation with the original document, and have no hesitation in saying that, in general, they give a correct representation of the author's meaning. And it goes on for quite a while with some semantics and specifics. And the final one, that one is from Samuel H. Turner. And the final one, New York, April 30, 1840, from a Professor Bush. It says Geo.Bush, I'm assuming that's George. Oh, gentlemen, I have examined portions of several chapters of the Book of Yashar in the original, carefully comparing it with the translation put into my hands by the publishers. The work itself is evidently composed of the purest rabbinical Hebrew, with a very large intermixture of biblical idiom, and I consider the translation as a whole decidedly faithful, but as peculiarly happy in retaining the air of antique simplicity which distinguishes the original. Then again, it goes on for a little while, which of course you can see those yourself in the Book of Yashar. So they thought that this was a faithful rendering of the original document. Now I want to reiterate, they're talking about the original document, that being the one said to originate from the 13th century. So not necessarily that it is in fact a genuine Book of Yashar as referenced in the Bible, but it's certainly not fraudulent or inaccurate in of itself. Truly old manuscripts of papyrus or paper or parchment don't last as long as compared to stone or bone. Many have been burned or destroyed in wars or religious purges, such as the case with the Quran, with the Uthman standardization, where most every manuscript of the Quran was destroyed after they were all summoned, along with all the village elders who knew verses. Some of them, the verses only existed in the heads of men. The village elders, they were all summoned and they made a state standardized Quran, and the rest was destroyed. Or what about the burnings of the Library of Alexandria? Well, many things have been lost, and we only have fragments, such as the Saga of Beowulf, where only a single original Anglo-Saxon variant exists, just one. What we do have is copies of copies. But there are ways to help tell if the text of a document is what it is claimed to be through literary forensics and forensic linguistics. You don't need a physical paper or stone copy of a text that originates from the time period in which the information is set to show its authenticity or lack thereof. I'll give 2 examples: the Jacob 1751 edition of Yashar and the Book of Job. The title page of the 1751 book says, translated into English by Albinus Alcuinus of Britain, Abbot of Canterbury, who went on a pilgrimage into the Holy Land of Persia, where he discovered this volume in the city of Gazna. So this man did live in Britain around 650, but the problem is that the manuscript is written in a Elizabethan style of English, which would not have been known to him at the time. And the first edition of this book claimed that he learned in the University of Oxford all those languages which the people of the East speak. But the problem is that Oxford wasn't founded until 886, which was about 80 years after his death. Subsequent editions omitted this remark, for obvious reasons. So these issues clearly raise red flags regarding the 1751 Yashar. But I did not find any such remarks regarding the 1840, which leaves it in more of a gray zone. So it says a Elizabethan style of English. So languages and dialects change quite rapidly. Just think about the vernacular of the 1950s compared to the 1920s, compared to the 1850s in our own modernized form of English. So you can tell by the flavor of the language whereabouts the document probably originated. So what about the Book of Job? The story in the Book of Job is regarded by believers as one of the oldest books in the Bible canon. The patriarch Job lived long before Moses. Unsurprisingly, some scholars, academics, and secularites, or materialists, hold the view that Job was written between the 5th and 7th centuries BCE, give or take. But believers hold the view that Job originates from at least 400 years prior to the writing of Genesis, but this depends on the biblical chronology you use. Each side has a right to their own opinion. What evidence do we have that Job is old? We'll consider a key piece. The Ebla tablets are a treasure trove of amazing discoveries in archaeology. They shed light on all kinds of things about the ancient world. The Eblite language has shed much light on the Hebrew language of the Bible. For instance, the Hebrew word for water, mayim, Strong's 4325, is written as may in the possessive form water of. In Job 9:30 is the phrase water of snow. But instead, the word may, the word mw, how it's spelled out, is written instead of mey. The Masoretes assumed that this was a defective spelling, and in the margins of the Masoretic text, they wrote a correction. But they might have been a little bit premature in their corrections, because in the Eblite language, discovered in the tablets, the word for water, mw, and Job is preserved in the more ancient Semitic spelling. The Eblite language gives insights into Hebrew and other Semitic languages. The word menlam, Strong's 4512, only appears in Job 1529. And by only appears once, I mean in the entire Bible, and it is not found in any other Semitic language. So the exact meaning of this word was unknown, but it was often rendered substance or wealth. In Eblite, the word mainelum meant property or cow. In relation to this, Mitchell Dahoud wrote in the archives of Ebla, Ugarit, and the Bible, and I quote, "How did this hapax legomenon, meaning a word of singular occurrence, get into Job, a book dating," he's assuming, to the 8th or 7th century BC? A chronological chasm of 18 centuries separates Ebla from Job. Might I put forth the possibility that no such chasm exists because the account of Job originates from that time period, and academics were wrong in their presumptions? That's the simplest explanation. So circling back on track with these things in mind, the 1840 Book of Yashar might be a collection of Jewish histories, or oral traditions from the Jewish Midrash, mixed in with biblical accounts that greatly predate 1840, 1625, or the 13th century. We don't really know for sure. All we do know is that it would probably be incorrect to call it the full and genuine Book of Yashar. Midrash is an interpretation of any text in its strictest sense. It designates rabbinic biblical interpretation, the modes of exegesis, as well as a specific corpora of rabbinic literature from antiquity to the early medieval period. So I, at this time, feel like this document called Yashar is a collection of such works. So why read it? Number one, at minimum, reading manuscripts like this Book of Yashar gives us an idea of how people in the past thought and what they taught, about their folklore, their worldviews, and their theology. It can also show us correlating accounts of ideas that were floating around in centuries past. Go over this example. In chapter 4, verse 18 of this Yashar book, it reads, "And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with another, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon earth, all men and animals." Chapter 2, 19 and 20. "For in those days the sons of men began to trespass against God, and to transgress the commandments which he had commanded to Adam. Be fruitful, and multiply in the earth. And some of the sons of men caused their wives to drink a draught that would render them barren, in order that they might retain their figures, and whereby their beautiful appearance might not fade. Now, this is an interesting tidbit that goes along with other such accounts found in pagan and biblical records, that we might refer to in our modern vernacular as hybridization, body alteration, eugenics, and genetic engineering. This, of course, revolving around mythology, or records of demigods, titans, giants, Nephilim, Rephaim, other hybrids, and in some instances, Gibborim, meaning mighty one. A side note, hybrids can be considered Gibborim by definition, but a Gibborim does not have to mean hybrid. Anecdotal evidence from Sumerian records and folklore of the Armenians, or other such local groups, show that Nimrod, or Inmarkar, became or began to be a mighty one, a Gibborim. The Hebrew word in Genesis 10:8 is shalal. This word means to profane, to break your word or oath, or dissolve, or opening by wedge. One could read force. Well, that's a very interesting way to word something. Nimrod broke a vow, dissolved a covenant with God, and then began to be or became a Gibborim. We, of course, see Nimrod's having a covenant with God in Yashar chapter 7, starting in verse 29. But let's read verses 46 and 47. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him, from the days of the flood until those days. And he made gods of wood and stone, and he bowed to them, and he rebelled against the Lord, and taught all his subjects and the people of the earth his wicked ways. And Mardon, or Marduk, his son, was more wicked than his father. So I have the kind of mind where I can take many different fragments or puzzle pieces from different sources and people and even time periods and pull them together to form a more complete picture. Now hold on. I acknowledge the inherent danger of eisegesis and confirmation bias. I get it. I try to be fair and empirical and honest about my beliefs, and I'm not set in stone about such side topics. But to me, the correlation of the Bible, mythology, and folklore regarding this specific account, among others, that we've considered here is part of the reason I believe that true and mostly true things can be found in the Yashar document. I do not believe that it was pulled out of the ether. It does not have that feel or flavor to me. It very roughly parallels the books of Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. But there are deletions, alterations, yes, but elaborations and enrichments as well, and amplifications of other scriptural stories that are found in the Bible and in older Jewish writings of this kind. One of the stories quoted in this document is Abram's at the time, dealing with Terah, his father, and his idols. The story is entertaining, but it doesn't really add to biblical doctrine any more than what we can read in Isaiah 44, 9 and 20 regarding idols. So, wrapping up, it's an interesting book, entertaining if nothing else, and I do believe it contains truths, including things that were lost or not included in the Bible canon. However, nothing about it is vital to know or important to salvation through Christ, and I do not believe it to be inspired or protected text. And in the personal opinion of this man, for whatever that's worth, it shouldn't be treated as such. And certainly nothing in it should override any clear-cut doctrine found in the Bible itself. So therefore, I think a prayer for a spirit of discernment should be made while reading the book to allow the pieces of truth hidden in the material to be revealed to the reader. Thank you. At some point in the future, I do plan to address some of the accounts in the Book of Yashar, around a few of the oddities that one might dismiss out of hand. This actually went far longer than I had planned. I bid you good evening, and I'll see you next time.